guys, welcome to my book chat book review. This is the Motley Verse, where many interests are entertained, examined, and explored. We have a book chat episode for you today, and I'm going to be chatting with you about a book that I have recently read. I'm going to be sharing with you any insights or inspirations or questions that I have of the book. And if you have read this particular book that I'm reading, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Otherwise, tell me a book that you're reading, and I just might add it into my to be read list. So without further ado, let us start the show. So today's book is Dr. Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto, and it's a New York bestseller. Don't ask me what that means. I don't exactly know what it takes to get that, but I know it's a good thing. And I also know that a couple of other books I have read have actually referenced this book. And these were pretty accomplished authors and books that did well. So I take it that this particular book is also doing well too. So, but I liked it. Before I even delve into the book, one of the things I really enjoyed about this book is the ease with which you could read it. I really like it when an author focuses on just getting his message across in the most concise and precise, efficient way. You know, sometimes authors, they get into the style and the creativity of the writing, and sometimes, the message is not as easily digestible and the book is not as easy of a read. This one wasn't that. Like, I didn't have to pause so much to look up words. I didn't have to frown so much because I was thinking. Not to say that I don't enjoy those books, and not to say that this book didn't give me anything to think about, but I just like that it flowed. Like, the ideas were just coming across so easily off the page, and I really like that about this book. So if you like books that are like that, this is a good one to read. Okay, so what this book is about is that Dr. Gawande is trying to, he's essentially trying to find out how to make surgeries safer for patients. He is trying to figure out how to cross the gap between the amount of knowledge that the medical practitioners have, but are still having these mistakes that sometimes can be fatal. So he's going on this journey to figure out, okay, what can we do to make it safer for our patients? What particular things, what is it that we can do to bridge this gap between our knowledge and when we misapply the knowledge? Because he explains in the book that sometimes, mistakes come from ineptitude, which is that you have knowledge and you didn't apply it well, or ignorance when you don't have the knowledge in the first place. And he surmises that most of the mistakes in medicine is because of ineptitude. The knowledge is there, but sometimes we misapply it and the patient pays for that mistake. So he's trying to figure out what to do, how to go about changing that. People who work in healthcare are some of the most educated people in terms of the amount of time that they spend in formal schooling, in academia. They spend years, decades sometimes in school, yet these very highly trained people still make some mistakes that that on paper would seem like they should have been able to avoid it, right? And so again, this is what he's trying to figure out. And to do this, he consults with two industries that do pretty complex but serious work. The first is constructions or engineering, those who build buildings, and aviation, pilots who fly planes. These are two industries that, as you can imagine, if they make an error, it will be quite fatal. Yet these two industries happen to operate in a manner that seems to be less error prone than those of us in healthcare. You can imagine that if a skyscraper falls that will be dangerous and it's going to get a lot of attention. Same thing as a plane. If a plane falls out of the sky, it's going to be dangerous and it's going to get a lot of attention. And so he consults these two industries first, and what he gets from them is what he brings back. And the two main things that he takes from them is that, one, both operate with a lot of communication. The different members of the team who are building the house or the skyscraper, or the different members who are on the plane that are responsible for flying the plane from point A to point B, they are, in a sense, empowered to continue to communicate throughout the process of the project. Everybody's talking to each other until the job is done. And so that's one of the things that he brings back. And you could argue that that's already medicine, but then, is it? That's a good question to ask yourself, because you also have to think about when he wrote this book. This book was published in 2008. A lot has changed since then in healthcare. There's been a lot more effort into bringing this whole kind of collegiality mentality, like teamwork mentality between everybody. But, one could argue that I've never worked in an operation room, but at the time that he was writing, there might have been a hierarchy that existed in the operating room that dictated how people could speak up throughout the surgery, So that's one of the things that he took out from the construction and aviation industry. The second one is the checklist, hence the name of the book, The Checklist Manifesto. In particular is the aviation industry. The aviation industry are deeply, deeply committed to the checklist. I'm talking about the pilots, the people building the planes, the business owners who own the machinery, everything. Everybody has bought into the idea of checklist, which wasn't always there, but they have seen through time that this has proven to work for them. I'm talking about they have a checklist for everything. Like if the right engine light comes on, or if the left door swings slightly open, there is a checklist for when this left door to the cabin swings slightly open and nobody knows why. In that moment, they don't want the pilot to rely on their memory, on their experience, and just on their skill at that time. They want them to go consult the checklist. And this is not to take away from your skill. It's not to take away from your skill set or your experience. Actually, it is to make sure that you do everything that you need to do so that you can now do what you need to do. How do I put this? It's to make sure that you do all the things that are necessary that now allows you to practice and perform at your best ability. He references Captain Sully, the pilot who flew the plane that landed on the Hudson River. He and his co-pilot, who communicated through all that, definitely consulted all the checklists that they needed to consult. And all that allowed Captain Sully to be Captain Sully at that moment. He was not distracted by the little things that could be automated or that could be regimented. Those things were taken care of so that he could fly the plane, which is what we needed him to do. So that's what this checklist is, because as human beings, in the moments, we're prone to make mistakes, especially when stakes are high and when there's excitement in the air. We can forget little simple things that could actually drastically change the course of events. And so if you can put those little things in a checklist, then you can prevent that from happening. And there's a design and there's a whole machinery behind making checklists, because you have to make an efficient checklist, because if you make a checklist with 100 things on them where it takes the pilot 10 minutes to read, well, Sully didn't have 10 minutes to get, he didn't have 10 minutes. So you have to make the checklist efficient and not only it has to be efficient, and so that's one of the things that this aviation industry do. Once something happens, if they encounter something that has never happened before, immediately they are working on how to break down everything and put it down into small bullet point checklists that would always help the pilot if they ever encounter that scenario again. So that is essentially what is going on in this journey. And so he takes these two ideas of checklists mainly because that's the title of the book, but I do believe that there's another aspect that he brings back, which he doesn't highlight as much, but I think it's just as important. In fact, I think he highlights it as just as much. It's just that it's not included in the name of the book. I guess the checklist and communication manifesto doesn't have the same ring as the checklist manifesto, but I think that he makes it a point to say that these are just as important. And in both industries, he noticed that these are things that were helping them avoid errors. Because, okay, we'll get to that later. And so he now brings these things back, this kind of checklist mentality back into healthcare, in particular into the operating room, and he kind of documents what they're going through and how that helped them without spoiling the book. It helped, okay? It helped with the safety of the patients. So now is the part where we talk about if I have any questions or any things that I need to add on to the book. And earlier in the book, he breaks down problems. He says that there are three main types of problems. What time is it? Okay. He says there are three main types of problems. There are simple problems, there are complicated problems, and there are complex problems. So any problem that you have can be broken down into those three: simple, complicated, or complex. A simple problem is a problem that you can solve with a list. For example, you're trying to bake a cake. You get a recipe. If you never baked a cake before and you don't know how, and you have a problem, which is that you don't know how to bake a cake, you get a recipe, problem solved, at least kind of, okay? And then there's a complicated problem, which is multitude or lots of simple problem in one. For example, if you're trying to cater an event, let's say you're trying to cater a wedding that you've never done before, and maybe you don't know how to cook so well, you have a problem. But if you could get a list of recipes of the things that you need to cook and how and when to do it, then your problem is kind of, taken care of. Maybe if you do it a couple times, you have it figured out. And then there's a complex problem. Complex problems are just problems that no two scenarios are the same. You could, for example, raising a child, you could do A through Z in raising this first child, and that child comes out, perfect member of society. You do the same steps in the same order for child 2 and get completely different results. I'm laughing because I'm reminded of my children. God is helping me on that one. But yes, I can attest to this, okay? It's a complex problem trying to raise children. You have to figure out and adjust to the different scenarios. And I think that the comparison of the human body to planes and buildings is a little bit simplistic, which he does acknowledge, because there's a quote that he said in there. He says, no matter how routine an operation is, the patient never seems to be. The human body is just complex, and flying planes and building skyscrapers to me are complicated problems. There are problems that routine will completely take care of, but dealing with human beings is always going to be a complex problem, and it's something that routine alone can't help. But I do agree with him that routine does make a difference. Okay, so yes, we can definitely bring this whole regimented approach to things into medicine, and it will help, and he does show that it does help. But there's often this comparison in healthcare to aviation in particular. They always tell us, like, if pilots made mistakes or errors at the rate at which we make errors, that, I don't know, a plane will be falling out of the sky, I don't know, once every 6 hours or something like that. They don't make as much errors as we do in healthcare. And I think that part of it is that we're dealing with complex human beings, but I do agree that regimentation will help. I think another thing that will help is another topic for another book, another day. But just as regimentation allows the healthcare workers to perform at their best abilities, I think the working conditions could drastically improve. Human beings at their best already are prone to mistakes. Human beings working under stressed conditions, very, very stressful. You pull or sample a group of healthcare workers in these United States, and I don't know about all the other countries, but I speak to many in different countries, but let's just talk about these United States. More than likely, most of them are not going to be happy. They're stressed. They are looking for an exit, And when you're working under these stressful conditions, what are the chances that you're not going to make an error? So that's another thing that we need to address. We need to address, number one, like, we get that whole checklist thing in. We also, his communication, which is just as important. He mentions that in the book, where he talks about how in medicine sometimes we focus too much on the greatness of components. For example, how awesome this doctor that has spent 30 years perfecting this one thing that only him can do in the whole world. We focus on that, which is good, but there's not as much focus on the collegiality of the components working together as a team. So I think if we get that aspect of it, that teamwork and communication, better working environment, not so long hours. Why are we working so long hours? But I guess maybe the supply is not that much. Okay, not so better working conditions, and the checklist. I think it would make a huge difference. It's going to increase or decrease the error rates by significantly. Yeah, so that's my only addition to the book. So the winning combo is the checklist, communications, and better working environment. And that's going to help us, put us in the position to win when we're dealing with such a complex issue as caring for human beings. If you're someone who likes to read about healthcare, if you like to read about how to organizational leadership, and even if you're just a leader in your family, because I've actually thought about having checklists for my family, just regular routine things that sometimes you overlook but actually could make a difference in the family and the dynamics of the family and how things run. Even if it means just putting down a list of, let's say, every Monday, check to make sure that we have all this and we have enough to last us for 2 weeks in the house. For example, trash bags and all that. Things like that you can easily overlook, and then when you find out that you need it, it throws a wrench into the whole, how everybody's rest of the week is gonna go. So yeah, that is it for the book. I really enjoyed it, and I do recommend it. And tell me what you think. If you've read this book, tell me what you think about it. If you haven't read this book, of course, tell me what you are reading. I would like to hear, and I will see you in the next installment. I know I am looking forward to it. I'll talk to you later. Adios.